Hello and welcome to the National Press Club of Australia for today's Westpac address. My name is Julie Hare, I'm a director here at the club and the education editor at the Australian Financial Review. Professor Veena Sahajwalla, is that right? Is an Australian Research Council laureate professor, an internationally recognised materials scientist, engineer and inventor revolutioning recycling science. Veena won an Order of Australia in January this year and was the 2022 New South Wales Australian of the Year. Since 2021, she's been the head of the Micro Recycling Research Hub at the University of New South Wales. Most of you here today will know Veena for her inspirational work and tireless efforts to make sure everyone on the planet, well, nearly everyone on the planet, knows about her work. Veena's career has been devoted to developing new ways to transform waste, including the rapidly growing pile of e-waste. Here's a little factoid. Each Australian produces 20 kilograms of e-waste a year, which is remarkable, compared to the global average of 7 kilograms. So just bear that in mind. She has invented a way to produce steel that uses old tyres and is trying to eliminate coal from the steel-making process, replacing it with coffee grounds. Yes, that is correct. Replacing it with coffee grounds. And there's more. There's the Green Ceramics Micro Factory in Nowra, which transforms old plastic, glass and textiles into ceramics such as tiles, furniture and various architectural and decorative applications. The plastics filament micro factory at the University of New South Wales uses waste plastics to create valuable filament for 3D printing. Other micro factories produce green metals and green aluminium and transform e-waste. But this barely touches the surface of her brilliant and intriguing mind. Please welcome Professor Veena Sahajwalla.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Julie, for that really warm welcome and introduction. I am so thrilled to be able to share with you the journey that is the one at New South Wales University, and all those years ago when I started this work at UNSW, and I think the early days of green steel was a bit like that. Talking to people in industry and all of that, and you start the conversation, and of course you very quickly want to be able to get in and explain the science, and you want to talk about how it all works, and then in your mind you're going, wait, I'm racing forward, million miles an hour. What I really do need to do is kind of really pause and reflect as to how people even perceive what waste is. The fact that we're talking about waste as a resource today, and we're actually looking at the opportunities that this has to offer, is a remarkable testament to the fact that at UNSW, and yes, in Australia over the last 2 decades, the journey of doing green steel and then all the other remarkable microfactories and inventions are really only possible, first and foremost, with the support of UNSW and alongside that, support of industry and our local government partners. And I think if we didn't have that, we certainly would not be standing here today talking about all the incredible work that actually it's our industry and local government partners do each and every day. And as I take you through that journey and those stories in why we need to put a completely different lens on waste as a resource, it is important to stop and reflect on the fact that there are many different kinds of materials, whether they are metals or plastics or indeed glass in our waste resources. And you talk about e-waste. Yes, we indeed have so many important metals in our e-waste. And yet, ironically, of course, when we look at end-of-life electronic devices, we don't stop and think, oh gosh, that printed circuit board has got all that valuable copper and tin in it, and the fact that there is collectively, even between those important metals, you've got at least of the order of 20% concentration of these important elements. But yet we don't think of it as a valuable resource. Indeed, if you were to compare that with traditional resources that we would mine, there's only a couple of percentages, if that, concentration of elements like copper and tin. So it's kind of ironic that we go after those resources that are not that rich in these elements, and here we are sitting literally on valuable resources. And this is where, of course, one has to stop and reflect. Maybe it's an opportunity for Australia to lead the world with the way we think, because our thinking is shaped by the fact that one thing we are all proud of is our care for environment, our care for people. So the fact that we could be developing solutions and bringing technologies, new technologies off the back of new science. So yes, indeed, the work that we're doing in the world of e-waste, looking at how different kinds of metals, and of course, this important conversation that happened just this morning between our Prime Minister and President Trump talks about critical materials. Well, guess what? Absolutely, they are critical materials, and there are many other essential materials that we should be talking about in a holistic way. And if we start to pull all that together, you have to ask, well, okay, is it going to be economically viable? Because I think that's really what we all want to know. In the long term, it's about resources that can actually be mined literally from our waste piles. So imagine all of us who are actually owners of our own little mines in our homes, in our offices, between our laptops and all kinds of electronic devices. That's the beauty of looking at e-waste. And yes, we can be completely overwhelmed with those numbers, and they all sound really difficult to take in. But what we want to do is actually acknowledge the fact, yes, we all love our tech devices, and we all want to do the right thing. We'll happily go and drop them off at collection points, and we'll do all the right things, but I think we have to take it a step further. Conversations have to be a lot more sophisticated. It's not about just saying, well, here's e-waste. Oh, and you know what? Somebody's willing to give me a few dollars per kilogram of circuit boards. Therefore, I'm doing the right thing. It's getting recycled. But we have to take it beyond the conversation of recycling, and we have to start talking about remanufacturing. Why? Because, of course, what we are saying is those metals, copper and tin, guess what? They're worth something like, to give you a few numbers, more than, with copper, $8 to $10 per ton. You come to something like tin, you're talking about, and yes, the good old tin, no one even talks about it, but it's a metal that literally sold us on, right? I mean, that's really what its job is. $30 a kilogram. Now you start to add up all of these important metals, and you go, wait a minute, so why is it that somebody is giving us only a few dollars for these printed circuit boards? So this is where the conversation can actually be based on, first and foremost, an economic argument. We've got to make that economic argument, because then only can we say we need to create an ecosystem that is fair for everyone. So whoever's in the system of collecting different kinds of end-of-life products is able to monetize that, even if you're not a manufacturer. But the fact that we create an ecosystem whereby supply chains, new supply chains are created, is an important question in front of us. How are we going to change the ecosystem? And of course, then we can come to another important question of rare earths. Again, part of a very important conversation that is critical, because of course we know these elements are important for all kinds of important technologies. So why are we not talking again about these rare earth elements? Because guess what? We've got a lot of these rare earth elements in our electronic devices. Again, end-of-life products carry them. But yet, we don't necessarily have that conversation that says, oh, actually, that magnet, that permanent magnet in that hard drive, that contains neodymium. So what we need to do is go back and value what that neodymium is worth, so that we can start to put a dollar figure on all of this and then start to connect the ecosystem. So it's very easy to put big numbers at a big picture level and say, well, it's worth billions of dollars. But actually, how are we going to monetize it in localized supply chains? And this is where, of course, we need to start to talk about recycling, remanufacturing. But why remanufacturing? Because now it's no longer just a waste resource. It's actually a raw material. It's a raw material that's waiting to go into a advanced manufacturing supply chain. That's really what we're talking about. So in all of these numbers, it's very easy to see very quickly that whether we're talking about our printed circuit boards, whether we're talking about our hard drives, it's easy to start to see that there is an economic potential here. The connectivity with community comes in because, of course, at the moment, communities do all the right things. We collect these products, and of course, we don't necessarily see how this can be monetized in various remote and regional communities. But imagine in the future, whether you're in an urban setting or a remote or regional setting, the ability to feed these materials into the supply chain is going to be real, because each and every one of these elements are going to be in demand. Now, of course, one might say, well, that's all well and good when you're talking about these important rare earth elements and metallic materials. What about that humble plastic? Surely that's not worth a lot. Really no one cares about plastic because everyone sort of goes, well, let's not worry about it. If we're just sending all of this stuff, it'll end up probably in landfill because let's put it into the too hard basket. The realities are that you can again start to imagine what you could do in a microfactory setting in, again, various regions, various parts of Australia, because we could actually imagine small and decentralized facilities where these resources are not moving around over long distances, but rather taking on the technological innovation and implementing those. And this is where, of course, one might say, well, that's all a nice little kind of dream to have. But is it ever going to be real? Can we actually set it up in a way that it is genuinely going to create jobs? It is going to actually create that economic value in communities. And this is exactly where our partnership with Renew IT comes in. We've got James and Rosie in the room here today with us. The partnership started all those years ago with Renew IT, where it was pretty much about, wow, I can see all of this happening in your basement. How can we actually scale it up? So that's the kind of conversation that we should be having. But, scale at what level? It's not always about, here is a well-defined scale. It's about scalability that is fit for purpose. So indeed now, at the microfactory in Lane Cove, what Renew IT is doing is diverting every month 4,200 kilograms of plastic that is then being converted into plastic filaments for 3D printing. Why is that material so important? Well, because again, it's back to the economic value. If you just make plastic pellets, that may be worth, just $1 or $2 per kilo. Now you can amplify the value by creating plastic filaments, maybe an order of magnitude, maybe $10, $20 a kilo, because of course it has to perform. It has to compete with all the other materials and filaments that are now coming into the country. But what if we could actually take that 100% recycled plastic filaments and use that for 3D printing? If you're a consumer, if you're somebody who actually cares that I want to do my bit, these are the kinds of things that we're seeing from consumers. People want to be able to come in and have a look for themselves. I know at the microfactory in Lane Cove, the number of times we've had these tours. And of course, this is another element of why this kind of collaboration and opening up our hearts and mind is so important. Because we know that ultimately, if we're going to inspire people, community members, we're going to inspire the future generations to think about this innovative solution and many others that are going to no doubt be developed over a period of time, we need to be able to open our hearts and minds and open our doors, demonstrate, of course, to kids and community members and parents and grandparents alike that this is why we need science, this is why we need innovation and technologies. But the most important thing that we have seen out of this is the partnership and the collaboration between UNSW and Renew IT that has led to this point, that we can now refer to the fact that that first line, that very first line, is already diverting 4,200 kilograms per month. Imagine if we had more and more lines, and that's exactly what Renew IT will be doing. And then taking it all across Australia and potentially internationally. Again, how cool is that? That people are going to refer to Australian microfactory technologies as basically an exemplar of what can be done. We shouldn't be talking about, oh, this is low value and that's not worth worrying about. Of course, it's always easy to say that that's too hard. You know what, let's just collect all this e-waste and we'll let somebody else worry about it. Well, actually, there's no recycling fairy out there. So, I mean, you know, we don't have anybody else who's going to do that work. It's not quite as simple as that. So indeed, when we talk about the champions, our industry partners are the champions in this ecosystem. We know very well that if we start to think about more and more examples of what we're trying to do, is another example when it comes to all those things that we use in our homes every day. But again, don't think about it. The good old aerosol cans, right? When you kind of use those, you don't even think about, oh, it's aluminium. Surely it must be getting recycled. Surely there's enough sort of value in it, right? But if you actually ask, what is it worth? Aluminium's price could be somewhere $2 a kilogram, right? But if you've got now a layered aluminium, like that you see in various cans, you've got, in fact, a polymer layer on top of that aluminium. Of course, when you have to put that back into remanufacturing, what if you wanted to put that back into making more cans? You have to ask the question, well, how do I deal with that polymer coating? So this is exactly where we're proud that just last week, and we've got John in the room from James Strong Packaging in Taree, in New South Wales. They opened up the microfactory that actually is now ready and poised so that as this technology is scaled up, their factory, which is, of course, reshoring, bringing that production back into Taree, that reshoring, making metals, and of course, casting, and ultimately making cans right there in Taree will be able to absorb metal from reclaimed aluminium. That is important because, of course, if we keep saying, well, it's okay, somebody else will recycle it, we're missing out on an opportunity. And of course, there's an important question. You know, is it really that important other than just kind of putting stuff at a landfill? Well, it is important because, of course, making aluminium costs a lot of energy. So the carbon footprint, as we all know, is very high. Once we have made that aluminium and it has been liberated from ores, all that energy that went into it, think about that metal as basically a fundamental element where we have bundled in all of that energy. Effectively, it's metal sequestration. We've actually put that energy into that atom of aluminium because it took a lot of energy to make in the first place. Why would we call it, oh, well, it's low grade, we're not going to worry about it. Those cans, no, it's not worth a lot. Somebody else will worry about it. And this is where we're changing the mindset and saying, okay, well, actually, what if the destination Taree in the future could not only have that microfactory that will allow us to convert that can back into clean aluminium so that we could take that clean aluminium free of all of that coating and layering and put that back into production. Small production, and therefore that allows, and yes, it may be small, but the numbers are pretty staggering. I think 100 million cans per annum of that order. That is incredible for Australia to have a facility like this in Taree that is now going to actually be at the level where it's going to close the loop in a holistic way. This is why when we talk about circular economy, we know we have to talk about not just collecting the materials, not just saying that we need to manufacture quality products. Whether we're talking about copper or polymer filaments, or whether we're talking about aluminium, we need to produce quality products. And this is why it's not enough to say, well, somebody's got a smelter somewhere. They'll make it out there, and then they'll send that feedstock back to us, and we won't worry about what's in there, but we'll just assume that they've done the right thing. What if we wanted to be able to take control of the entire ecosystem? That means all types of aluminium, and don't forget there's blister packs and all kinds of other materials that potentially, because they're multi-layered, could well be considered as low grade. Well, no more. Once you've got a production facility like this, then it is no longer a lower grade material. It is a high value feedstock. And this is what we're talking about. We need to be able to value these materials when we put them back into production. The technology that I was mentioning to you earlier around a green steel is one of those examples where it's not that easy to imagine how waste rubber tires, that you might think, well, what's rubber tires got to do with the making of steel? We're actually now talking about micro at the level where we're liberating, through our green steel polymer injection technology, we're liberating hydrogen inside the furnace. That electric arc furnace, we create a medium inside where that allows us to carry out the metallurgical reactions, conversion of iron oxide to iron and eventually steel. All of that requires us to not just understand what happens to those rubber tires, but it's also important for us to understand, well, really, are these reactions all going to take place in harmony? Yes, it is like an orchestra. And we have to imagine that there are a whole range of different interactions between different materials that are taking place. And that is why we have to understand not only what happens to these waste resources, we have to understand what happens to that metal itself. So imagine in the future, if we are going to talk about decarbonization, and if we are going to bring in hydrogen into the picture, here is a pathway to creating impact. Because we know very well that we've got more than enough, millions and millions of car tires that are available. And it's not just about Australia. This is about the world saying, well, okay, if we've all got all this surplus tires, that maybe some of it is used as a source of energy. But what if those countries, those places that were actually wanting to make green steel, were looking at this as an opportunity to liberate hydrogen? And yes, indeed, the carbon atoms that allow us to make steel. Steel is, after all, an alloy of iron and carbon and many other elements. So in all of these conversations, we can sort of go, well, it's all nice. We've talked about metals and some very high-performance plastics. That's all great. But you know what? When it comes to things like waste glass and textile waste and so on, it's never going to be possible to produce something high quality. Maybe we'll do some fiber to fiber for textiles. That's great. Of course, so we should. We should always be looking at multiple pathways. The like-for-like conversion is important. But what if we end up with mixtures, complicated mixes that are then going to be difficult to convert them back into the original form again? What if we could take those blended feedstock, waste glass, waste textiles, and bring that together in a whole new reformed state? So when we want to talk about going beyond recycling and talking about remanufacturing, fundamentally at the scientific level, what are we actually doing? We're reforming those elements to create new structures. And this is where we've shown that indeed by taking waste glass and waste textiles, we've been able to create these kinds of green ceramic tiles. And I take a lot of pleasure in actually showing you some of these tiles, because indeed the team from Liverpool sitting right here with big smiles on their faces are to be congratulated, because it doesn't happen all the time that you get a pretty dynamic bunch of people And I have to say, Tim, as the head of circular economy at Liverpool, has always said, oh yeah, what do we need to make that happen? Okay, we can do it. And I think, to me, that kind of absolute can-do attitude, that is really where I feel so inspired that we could be working with businesses, we could be working with local governments. And that's the spirit of generosity, because it's not just about, oh, we're going to do it in our council, so, we're good. But it is so much more than that. I think Tim's always of the view that if we're going to open our doors and we're going to inspire many others to do this, yes, we should be the ones, opening our doors to others to come in and see. And the example I was giving you earlier, that where Renew IT opens their doors, their hearts and minds to inspire future generations, STEM kids, and the ones who want to be able to come and see what it's like actually to do science and technology and engineering and to actually see waste as a resource. We need to have that ecosystem that works, which means we need passionate people and inspiring people who are going to always be there to say, yep, come along, have a look. Here's what we're doing. It's not just about something that we just keep, our little secret. And this is what we love about collaborating with so many of our industry partners and our partners in local government. I want to, of course, come to one other important point connected to communities. What we have done within Sustainable Communities and Waste Hub. I have the privilege of leading that hub, and the colleagues I get to work with across the country, again, just inspire me all the time. The conversations, whether they are social scientists or whether they are people who love design and members of community who want to be able to go, oh yeah, we'll try that. Let's give it a go. So we have a project that is running live at the moment that allows us to not only go and have a conversation in community, and one example right now in Wellington near Dubbo is a case in point that we can actually show that once people get to see and feel a product and they go, great, can we give it a go ourselves? Can we try it out? I think this is where we are literally in actual prototyping phases and trialing phases. And I thought, I really should actually share with you. I'm sure I could actually hold up a 300 by 300 and show you that this is exactly the kind of green ceramic tile that's actually being trialed and prototyped out in Wellington. And to me, the reason why we do that is because we need to be able to see how communities respond and how communities get excited about this, and acknowledging our local partners, the Indigenous community members, the ones who are actually tirelessly working to inspire their friends, their families, constantly talking about the possibilities. I remember kind of listening to one conversation which was about, oh, this is great. If we just make it 500 by 500, that could be a coffee table. This could go into cafes. And of course, when you start to hear stories, you go, yeah, that's it. Now, then he connected that story back to going, well, actually, there is a local cafe. That cafe is next to the playground where mums take their kids to play, and wouldn't it be lovely if we had a coffee table? Wouldn't that be a great way to talk about what is actually happening? And I think the fact that we could get that type of feedback, I think that actually tells us that we've connected with both hearts and minds. Because imagine a future where in Australia, communities will be able to come in and go, you know what, we'd love to be able to have a product that we can put in our homes, in our community centers. And you know what, let's try and see how we can not just use the product, let's see how we might be able to be part of the ecosystem that can be a part of the supply chain. So, of course, we could be bringing in waste textiles, we could be bringing in waste materials that can then become part of the conversation. And I think, to me, this is exactly the reason why we as researchers do what we do, is when we listen to these stories and community sentiments, it shows that ultimately we're making a difference. We're delivering on impact. Because when communities want to see more and more of this type of innovation and want to engage with us, want to come in and see how it's done, because of course, somewhere at the back of everyone's mind is, can we come and have a look at how it's made? Because you know what? Maybe in the future we could have one of our own. And that's exactly what tells us that we've really made a difference. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but as time goes on, as more and more of these kinds of materials and products, the fact that we're talking about circular aluminium and we're talking about circular hydrogen, all of these kinds of materials have something to offer. So let's not see it as simply a waste resource. Let's start to see it as a material that, in fact, is ready to be harvested, a material that can actually make a difference to our environment. And from our perspective, the ability to collaborate and partner up and work with governments, with industry, with communities, shows that there is actually an opportunity here for Australia to actually show leadership globally. And this is where the exciting new frontier waits for us. The kinds of conversations and the pull that we're seeing from those industries in the world who like to see these types of technologies are excited about the potential of what we're bringing to the table. It's a whole new way of thinking. It's a whole new way of showing that remanufacturing, using new supply chains, creating new ecosystems is important, whether we're in remote and regional communities, in urban centers, in Australia, and in the world. But one thing we have is we have the most important resource, the passionate people who are here in the room today, who actually continue to collaborate and continue to want to do this work with us, which means the journey of R&D, doing world-leading research, but also at the same time delivering research together. I think that's the important point. I want to, of course, before I finish off, reflect on the time at UNSW. I want to acknowledge our Dean, Sven, the team, Jamie sitting there, from I&I, Industry and Innovation, who help us champion these, take that science, deploy the science, and take it out into the real world. So the real world impact of science is not just something that happens. You actually have to work in partnership and collaboration. And finally, last but not least, I want to thank, of course, Harry, our senior microfactory engineer, who has been an absolute gem. Harry started his journey with us at UNSW all those years ago as a PhD student, and kind of never left. Of course, he is an absolute treasure, and we hope that we can continue all together to inspire future generations of bright young minds to make a real impact to our planet and to our people. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Veena, thank you so much. Before I ask my first question, I will point out that you can recycle your speech because you didn't even open it. It's completely pristine, so use it for another occasion. I have a lot of questions, but I think I'll pick up where you kind of left off, which is around commercialisation. Mm-hmm. So your work is very much focused on creating products and materials that can be for the real world, but in Australia, there's a lot of debate about how Australian scientists aren't very good at commercialisation. There's also a lot of kind of debate at the moment about the underfunding of science and where commercialised or commercialisable science sits with blue skies research. Obviously, you started your journey, I would imagine, in blue skies because you wouldn't be able to do what you're doing now. So could you just reflect on the priorities and how each of those two things are funded?
Yeah. So there are, of course, without sort of going into all the details. There are various programs that government has where you can sort of have that collaborative effort between industry and academia to be able to commercialize and to trial techs and to do all of that. But you're absolutely right. I mean, to get to that point, if blue sky stuff and all that fundamental science is not there, then of course you're never going to get it to the level where you can even talk to industry. And I remember in the early days of green steel, of course, funded through ARC grants, I did not have an industry partner who I could bring on board because I was relatively new to Australia. But I think to me, what was really so good to your question around how did I even sort of then say I want to be able to get down that journey of commercialization, which is where, of course, I wanted to acknowledge when I said, people like Jamie at the whole sort of I&I, industry and innovation segment, they are the experts who can, in a university like ours, give that guidance and advice and say, let's think about it, let's brainstorm. How are we actually going to go on that pathway? It's not about, okay, here we have this tech, right? Find an industry partner, and off you go. Give it to them, and then you just walk away.
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that. We're going through, of course, various examples, the ones I've given, where commercialization is very much part of the journey. That conversation means that there are a lot of steps in the middle. People like to sort of call it, the valley of death and whatever. But I think to me, in my mind, I just see it as, a bridge that connects different parts of the ecosystem. I think it's very important that we do, the kinds of examples I've given where it's not just about saying, well, when I'm good and ready, I will sort of take this thing out of the labs and go to my industry partner site and drop it off there. In between all of that is a lot of hard work that says, we've got staff, we've got students, people who are going to have the opportunity to be a part of the journey of setting up more microfactories at Renew IT, an example that I was giving earlier. That's how you make it happen. It's not about, well, I've turned the switch on today, I'm making plastic filaments, so therefore it's commercialized. Commercialization, of course, is a long journey because in between that comes the industrialization steps. So I often like to make that point that you have to see that journey as where in that process your industry partner and you feel comfortable, because don't forget somewhere in there is the quality and performance of these products. So when we talk about all of these products, these green ceramics and others, quality of products is important. You've got to be able to then make sure that what you've made in your labs or in your pilot facility is something that is actually going to be fit for purpose. It is compliant with various standards. There is a whole lot of other work that then sits in between. So I think to me, that's the kind of stuff that we have to pay attention to. And I think the more we do that in partnership, the ability to not just say, well, it's a trial product, I sort of went in and, put in a tile in a little place and I've walked away, now it's all good. There is also that other element, like we were talking before, around where's the human, the hard side of it. You can make the most compliant product, but nobody may like it. So there's that other element. So hence, my point earlier about our Sustainable Communities Waste Hub around how we work with communities is to be able to show that, it can be the best, most compliant product. But, what does the user feel about that? Because if we're creating a market pull and a demand for these kinds of innovative solutions, there is that element that goes with it. And I think, yes, absolutely, whether you're talking about the manufacturer, the operator, or the end user, people have to find the reasons why it matters to them. If I'm interested in recycling and keeping a lot of that waste out of landfill, great, if that's one reason. But if I want to be able to look at, in addition to that, the hardcore numbers and the economic argument, then we have to be able to make that argument. It's not saying, well, it's a green product, so people will pay whatever. Of course, that will never work either. So that's really why I often do tell people, and the conversations that we have at UNSW is about how do we actually take those steps forward in our journey, and we do that in partnership with our industry partners.
Okay. I'm just, before we go to our first question, I'm just really interested in this concept of, waste as a resource that you started talking about. On the Harvard Index of Economic Complexity, Australia's got one of the least complex economies in the globe. Is that because, and it also delivers us enormous wealth, like we're an enormously wealthy country. Does that make us kind of lazy and a bit immune to the idea around recycling and using waste as a resource?
It's such a good question, isn't it? Because I think, to me, unless and until, again, we make the argument about why does it matter, and this is where the economic argument comes in. So if I give you that example, I was giving an example of copper being in that range of $8 to $10 a kilo as metallic copper. Now, if you say, okay, well, actually, but what's there in our batteries? If you sort of imagine copper, what's the form? Copper is present as a foil inside our batteries. So if that's the form, how much is that worth? So, okay, wait a minute. So that's now worth of the order of maybe $20 to $50 a kilo. Suddenly now we've amplified the value in there. If we start to see it in that connectivity and join the dots between what is a feedstock and a raw material, let's not just see it from the point of view of, oh, it's a metal and it's worth so much because, that's the prices at which it's selling for. If we suddenly are made aware of the fact that it could be monetized and we could add value even further in the way we see this as a resource, we're not going to see it as, oh, it's a waste and therefore we don't care. But we're going to see it from the point of view of, so that's what's there in our lithium-ion batteries. Oh, there is a copper foil in there. Oh, it's worth a lot more than what I had actually thought it would be. I think once we start to make those arguments...
So it's kind of rethinking waste.
It is rethinking waste, and not just kind of saying, well, all I need to do is, kind of shred those products and then, separate them out and then, it'll be worth whatever it's worth, and that's what I'll be happy with. I think we need to be able to be a lot more sophisticated in the way we have those discussions, and I think that's what the next frontier needs to be.
Okay, our first question is from Corey McLeod from Innovation Oz and a director at the club.
Thank you, Professor. Building on the conversation you've just had and Julie's question, when we're looking at those end user customers and what's really going to scale and pull through, there's obviously the economics and the corporate and social responsibility. Is there enough manufacturing in this country? Is there enough awareness of where the economics make sense amongst business decision leaders in the country? And if there's not, is that the export market is the kind of new materials for other countries that do manufacture more than we do currently?
So, again, a good question, because I think, to me, we assume that, we can't do it because we don't have the capacity to do manufacturing in Australia. But I would probably challenge that by saying, but wait, what if we could use examples of those? We've got a couple of examples in the room here today that I pointed out who are probably not doing manufacturing till they got this microfactory up and going. So, James and people out at Liverpool nodding away going, wait, we were actually not doing manufacturing. We were people who were collecting waste, and then, we were kind of seeing that as part of our core business model. What we're basically saying now is that, no, actually, if I continue down that example of the copper foil, if that could be generated, there is no reason why that market pull for that value-added material. So now we're sort of saying it's a material that becomes a component that then becomes a product. Somewhere on that value-adding journey, you need those materials and you need components. Even if we were not making the finished product today, what we could be making are circular materials and circular components. That just means that foil now, if it is of the right quality, and yes, there are specifications as to what that quality is like, there are buyers in the world for materials like this, for products like this, where the demand is only going to keep increasing. And we know for electrification, we're going to need these important essential metals. So I think for us, it's an opportunity that says, let's not just stop at the point that says, well, I've just made that metallic material. Or even worse, I've just got a printed circuit board yes, it might have 10, 20% copper, but I'm just happy to take whatever someone pays me. So I think the mindset has to be around the more we can actually do here on shore, the more it will incentivize those that are looking to do product manufacturing to go, yeah, wait, actually, there is somebody in Australia who is able to regenerate those copper foils. Therefore, I could be buying that back. So again, if I just use that simple example, and I think the list would go on and on if we started to say, again, if we were to say cobalt, I'm just sort of staying with the battery example there, people might go, okay, I'm happy to have the black mass that's inside a battery, sent away, somebody else will worry about it. But what if we could actually regenerate copper and cobalt? And remember, there's both current collectors, so there's obviously copper and aluminium as basically the foils that we've talked about, but there's, in the lithium-ion battery, you've also got enough cobalt. So why would we not regenerate that when, again, that's a good example of something that's a critical metal? So we're actually now saying, wait, here's all this conversation that's happening around critical materials, but yet at the same time, when we look at, lithium-ion batteries and the fact that it's a rich source of cobalt, we should at least be looking at that first step of regenerating that metallic value and not just being happy with the fact that, oh, the battery's been dismantled, that's good. Yeah, we've done everything safely, done all of that. Now we've got this black mass. What do we do with it? Well, actually, you can do so much more with it. So to me, if you have then generated, so some of our results that we have published is shown we can make that cobalt about 96% purity. Right? Now, these are all examples of what micro-recycling science shows in practice is possible. Of course, there's going to be demand for metals like cobalt. So I think we just have to be able to move up the value chain.
Thank you.
Our next question is from Simon Gross from Canberra IQ.
Thanks for your speech. All your partners and clients are manufacturers. About 3 weeks ago in this room, the President of Manufacturing Australia gave what was basically a kind of a muted cry for help. Also, seems most of your customers or your clients are on the east coast of Australia. He was talking about the east coast gas supply, and he was calling for cheaper gas and more gas supply. I'd like to ask you to reflect on that in general, but also to what extent are the high gas prices in Australia constraining the potential to develop the technologies you're coming up with?
Yeah, look, for us, one of the key things when we talk about energy is directly questioning the conventional processing that happens. So if I use the example of these green ceramic tiles, reflect on that for a moment. A more traditional ceramic would have, as a result of sintering processes, would require about 1,000 degrees Celsius. We're now talking about something that can be done at 200. So if you start to actually question the traditional ways in which we have been doing manufacturing, we say, okay, wait, if we could drop these temperatures, obviously the energy requirements are going to come down, but I think to me the other important part is to become sustainable, we have to look at the energy and how that energy is going to be delivered. So we can't just sit back and go, well, traditionally these ceramics are, kind of made at 1,000 plus, therefore we're okay with that. If we had affordable gas and so on, we just continue down that path. I would actually challenge the notion that what we have to do is bring in renewable energy as part of the mix. But to be able to do that, whether you're talking about relying on, of course, renewables to be able to produce metals, or whether you're talking about, in this case, ceramics, questioning the traditional and the more conventional ways in which we manufacture and the temperatures at which a lot of this production is happening is important. Just like we're challenging what is a raw material, we have to then say, well, here's an opportunity to take that science and innovate so that we can actually start to say, well, it's not only going to be on the East Coast. In fact, the goal is, for examples of the likes that I've told about Renew IT, that it's going to go across the country. If indeed these products are being made in the West Coast, what you would then do is you'd say, right, okay, I'm not having to move all of that waste materials to the East Coast, because again, that doesn't make any sense to move waste around. Let's start to manufacture that at a small enough scale so that I can now start to work within what is fit for purpose. And this is where we're saying that we've got to look at both of those elements, materials, as well as the energy part of the equation. And of course, you can sort of start to arguably say, if we were to do that and question various processes where indeed gas is being used, what kind of alternative materials and pathways would we have so that we can actually start to question some of these energy requirements? So in green steel, for instance, through polymer injection technology, we've actually made the furnace that much more efficient. And I'm not saying we're fully there yet. We still are working towards the ability to use more and more of these recycled polymeric materials. But we will get there if the science is showing that it is possible to understand the kinds of reactions that are taking place inside the furnace. And this is why my point is that the two things in manufacturing particularly are not disconnected. How the materials are actually reacting and the use of energy and energy efficiency. And of course, this is why when you talk about projects like what we're saying here, making metals, is, we know, energy intensive. How do we actually question how more and more recycled materials coming back into the system can allow us to lower our energy consumption is the long-term question if we are going to truly decarbonize.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Melissa Code, the Mandarin.
Hi, thanks for your talk. In your estimation, how sophisticated do you think our circular economy is? How do we compare to other potential global leaders in this space? And is there a vision or ambition challenge holding us back when it comes to thinking about optimising the ecosystem instead of shining a light and celebrating, I guess, patchwork innovation?
Yeah, look, I mean, this is why, it's such a good point, right? We kind of often, as you say, okay, we might shine a light on examples that we've talked about today, but I think this is exactly why the kinds of programs that, government looks at funding to create the holistic approach is not about saying, well, let's do this thing in New South Wales or let's do that in WA or Victoria. I think it's much more important for us to be able to share those experiences. And if we are going to accelerate that transition that we're talking about, we have to be open to learning from each other. And even more importantly, we have to be open to the idea that piloting, trialing technologies and putting things into practice should be done as soon as that science can be translated, taken. I'm not saying it's got to be perfect, but if those piloting ideas can actually be developed further, I think to me this is why that kind of bridge across, building those bridges in the ecosystem is so important. We can't just go, well, I'll take it in a way that I'll first do this after I've done all that science, and then I'll take it to step number 2 and step number 3. And I think this is why for us, the kinds of things we're talking about here is connecting the various dots is critical. So yes, indeed, the kinds of things that we're talking about, what we might do in our labs, what we might pilot in our own basement at UNSW, that then should be ready for deployment. Will we be learning through the journey of that scaling things up? Absolutely. But we've got to be prepared to say that our ability to learn will come from the fact that we can rapidly deploy these kinds of solutions. So I think it is important that, yes, we do have some examples of the flagship, opportunities as they become available, but then very quickly look to moving it across the country and indeed, yes, inspiring hopefully the globe to take it on.
And just how we compare to our international peers?
Yeah, look, really, really good question. I mean, some of the recent travels where I've, been talking to people in India and Japan and so on, I think what's becoming pretty evident is what we're bringing to the table is quite exciting. They're obviously in conversations with UNSW to be able to say, you know what, these kinds of techs would be great to have in our own backyards. How do we collaborate? I think the fact that we're seeing a lot of that kind of interest is something that that blows the mind, because sometimes you assume, well, I mean, gone to places like Japan, surely, they've got fabulous technologies. But I think to me, people are now open-minded to the idea, which is what we're bringing to the table, is circular economy is more than just talking about recycling. There is a whole lot of sophisticated conversations that we're clearly having. So presenting recently, last month in Osaka at the expo, was pretty exciting to be able to see firsthand the level of interest in what we're doing.
Thanks.
Our next question is Grace Crivellaro, thank you, from AAP.
Hi, thank you for your speech. Just building on from it, what are the current challenges or bottlenecks in recovering critical minerals and e-waste, and how do we overcome them? And what role do government incentives or subsidies play in making this viable or even just more widespread?
Yeah, look, we certainly do need to be able to make this mainstream. It can't just be that, it's a nice to have thing, some communities are doing it, so we're all good. I think we need to accelerate. And what that then means is that we've got to have complete transparency in the system. If we're look at it from a community perspective, if I'm sort of dropping something off, through some collection days that are happening in my community, I need to be able to hear the full life cycle of what happened to that end-of-life product. So yes, I need to know if there is an old laptop or an old computer that had a hard drive that I know is a rich source of neodymium because it's there in the permanent magnet. It's about kind of knowing in a transparent way how that ecosystem is working. I think that also incentivizes community members to go, you know what, I need to do my bit. If this is what I need to do, if the choice is, here are 3 or 4 different councils, but I can see clearly that one particular council is, a leader in their world. I want to go that extra mile to be able to, take that end-of-life product to that particular council. Now, I think that kind of transparency is going to be important as we move forward. I think we also need to be able to have then those organizations that are participating, whether it's businesses or local governments, to be able to then communicate that message to the public, to say, you know what, we're telling you the story in a proactive manner of what we're doing with these end-of-life products. Let's start to put some numbers on it. I've attempted to put some numbers today in terms of just talking about what these different elements are worth. I think the more we can connect what something is worth, and therefore talking about circular economy as, in a way, a whole new foundation for the future, that's going to inspire people to go, I want to do my bit. And I think that's really where the missing piece of the puzzle is, the ability to communicate and have those conversations, whether it's the industry or the local government talking to their citizens. I think all of these are important. I think supporting organizations like that who are proactively going out of the way to support R&D. It's not just about, well, you go off and you do your R&D, but it's more than just putting a bit of money into that R&D. It's actually about deploying that. That's hard work, to be able to actually put these solutions into practice, like we were talking before, pilot it, trial it. I think that takes a lot of effort. And I would say, really those organizations that want to go that extra distance need to be supported. So we're lifting the entire system. Thank you.
Our final question is from Tony Melville.
Thanks, Professor. Tony Melville, National Press Club member. Around 5 years ago or so, China said, "We don't want your waste anymore." It was a real point of what we do about the circular economy, because suddenly we couldn't export a lot of our waste. Can you see with what you've been talking about today, with the sort of little micromanaging and larger manufacturing plants using the waste, that maybe one day we'd be importing others' waste?
Yeah. Well, you know what? If everybody else starts to wake up to the idea that this is actually quite a precious resource, they might actually say, no, we're not going to give you our resources. We'll deal with it ourselves. Thank you very much. So I think for Australia to be at the forefront of these innovative ideas is important, because the planet's got limited resources. We know our need is only going to keep increasing. For us to be actually really clever in the way we look at each and every end-of-life product is going to be important. So we connect it to actually not just, okay, how do we do it, but create a system that says around that, if we know what it is worth, how do we do it, we can actually start to create new jobs in various communities. And I think the more we can actually do that, not just kind of wait for somebody somewhere to go, yes, we've done it in capital cities, so we don't need to worry about it. I think it's really important that we start to look at how many different regional and remote locations where we can as well do something similar. And to me, that's going to be the next frontier, because the products we're talking about, we all have them. So how do we actually accelerate that pace at which we know these important materials and metals are going to be required, well and truly into the future? So how does Australia actually, incentivize communities? And the best way to do that is showing the economic potential and creating local jobs. I think empowering communities is the best way we can do this. Thanks, Tony.
Thank you. Before we thank Professor Sahajwalla, I would like to present her with a very special gold membership to the National Press Club, only for our very favourite people.
Aww,
thanks, Veena.